we thought the three of us would talk about kind of what we what's going on with the art scene in San Francisco, and we just had this open studios for the last about the last month or so. Charlie or Fred, what were your takeaways from the open studios?
Charlie, go ahead.
Oh, I always enjoy. I went to the shipyards and I went to Bryant, and I go there mostly for social reasons because I just know a lot of the artists that are there, and so it's always fun to catch up with people. I've run out of room on my walls. We live in a Victorian, so we just don't have a lot of room for art anymore, and so we didn't buy anything this time, which is a little bit unusual. But it's just really nice to see people and run into some new faces as well. And then, of course, so many of the people that I know are art fans. And so it's not just the artists, it's the art fans that I see as well. So it's really nice.
Yeah. And Fred, you actually had an open studio at your house. So what were your takeaways?
Well, by the way, I apologize if you can hear the noise in the background. They're doing road work in front of our house, which started around 6:30 this morning. So, well, my husband's an artist, and he had his second open studios this year. And I think Saturday was kind of raining, so there wasn't a big turnout. But Sunday he had maybe 40 people wander in and out. I think this year they returned to a neighborhood concept, but the geographic areas were huge each weekend. So it was really hard for people to park in one place and then walk around to a bunch of different galleries, except for places like the Shipyard and 1890 Bryant, which have many, many galleries in them. I like going back year after year and seeing how artists have evolved. There's people who've had these studios for years and years, and in many cases, they're exploring new things and new media and new subject matter, and it's fun to see what they're doing. So that's one of the aspects I just enjoy every year.
Yeah, it is fun. I love seeing a large quantity of different artists in just being able to kind of pick and choose about which ones I connect with. So that's always a lot of fun. And it was just I just thought I think a lot of people were particularly pleased that we could go back to open studios. The pandemic is in a place where we're able to do that. And, a lot of places, people preferred to wear masks. That was fine, but it was just good that we could do it. So let's see, we're at 1:00. I think we should get started. This is art.
I am
yes.
going to, let's see.
Oh, someone probably needs to mute. Who is that? We're hearing from somebody. But yeah, Rodney.
Rodney, at the academy, we have to wear masks at all times.
Well, I think we should all follow whatever regulations are chosen. So we're going to have a lot of fun today. I'm joined by my fellow SFMOMA guides, Fred Silverman and Charlie Goldberg, and I am Rodney Bronze Paul for this discussion. I don't know. I just kind of realized that we keep doing these things, and It's
the Olympic team.
Yeah, I don't mind being bronze.
But really happy to be the gold. Yeah.
Yes. But we've all been guides at SFMOMA, but that's been on hold for a while. But we decided to go back there and just kind of pick out some artworks that we can surprise one another with. I do want to kind of give you, Nikki, a chance to say a few things about the Community Living Campaign before we kind of jump in.
Okay. I feel like I'm a broken record. I'd like to find something new to say about our organization. But we're the Community Living Campaign. We're a nonprofit in San Francisco supporting people with disabilities, people with that are seniors, with seniors and our seniors. And we just do advocacy work for them. And we provide a lot of programming on Zoom. That's educational, that's cultural, that's valuable to your communities in the way of what your rights are and what resources are available. So keep in touch with us. I'll put our contact up in the chat. So proceed. Thank you, Rodney.
All right. And we are calling this Surprises of SFMOMA. And what's really surprising is that Fred and Charlie and I, none of us know what each has chosen. So we're going to be surprising each other and maybe asking each other some questions about the artworks we're going to discuss. I thought we'd do in a round robin fashion, and we didn't really discuss this, but well, since you're the gold, Charlie, you want to kick off, and I know you had wanted to talk about something that's kind of special at SFMOMA right now. Do you want to start with that that video installation?
No, I want to end with the
We're going to end with a video installation, and I'm going to stop sharing and let you, Charlie, go ahead and show us some slides.
Great. All right, so I my first choice is an old favorite. This is a piece that whenever I'm touring the second floor, which is the permanent collection, I always have people look at this piece. And one of the things I like to do is I like to stand in front of the wall text, and I say to people, if you know who painted this piece, please don't say anything. And I have other people look at this work and try to guess who painted it, because this is a double portrait of two very, very famous painters. On the left, we have Diego Rivera. On the right, we have Frida Kahlo. And I have them look at this work and try to figure out if there's hints that might tell us who painted this particular work. And of course, it's at SFMOMA now. It's actually part of the Diego Rivera exhibit. So the first thing I point to is the fact that, well, he's the one who's carrying the palette and brushes. So one might think that he was the one who painted it. Not only that, we think about how much real estate is taken up by Diego Rivera in this painting. He definitely takes up, I would say maybe 30 to 40%, whereas Frida takes up, a lot less, maybe 25%. But in fact, in real life, he took up more real estate than she did anyway. So it really doesn't give us an absolute clue as to who might have painted this. And then I have people look at the feet. And, this is something that's so wonderful about this painting. We see Diego's, workers' boots, he was a communist proletariat, big workers' boots. And then we see these teeny tiny bird feet. And we think, well, he's more important. Maybe he's the painter of this. But then I have people look at the color. And you really start to think about, where do your eyes go in this painting? And it's really hard to deny this color palette compared to this color palette. So in fact, it's Frida Kahlo that's the peacock in this. And what she's saying here is, look at me. He may be the most famous painter out of Mexico right now, but you know what? I'm the better painter, which is what she said 2 years after this painting. Between me and Diego, I'm the better painter. So, what's the other thing that's really interesting, there's many interesting things about this painting, but this painting has undergone radiographic analysis, and they've noticed that the shawl and the dress were originally painted pink and blue. But we can see now that they are red and green. And I always like to pose that question. Why would she have changed them to red and green? I'll give people a moment if they want to put it into chat as to why they think it might be red and green instead of pink and blue. I'll give you 5 more seconds. Oh, I hear someone typing.
We see Nikki has a hypothesis.
Yes. What? So the Mexican flag, yes, and Tresvina.
That's Nikki.
Yes, you're both correct. It's the Mexican flag. And Frida Kahlo was part of what's known as the Mexicanidad movement, and this was primarily Mexican women painters who were trying to instill the Mexican heritage into their work. So she does it in 2 different ways. She does it in this more obvious way, where she's got this Mesoamerican jade necklace here, but she does it in a more subtle, subconscious way to make us think about Mexico. But there's other things that are interesting about this. I think a lot of us know this particular painting, which is called the Arnolfini Marriage by Van Eyck. And I always ask people, what are the similarities and differences between these two? And you can see where the color palette is very similar. There's the green and the red of both. They're both holding hands in this sort of odd, a little bit cold way. There's lots of similarities, but one major difference is this little guy, this dog. And I like to ask people, why is there a dog in this marriage painting, but no dog in this marriage painting? And, it makes us think about, what did dogs represent in classical literature or in classical art? And the answer is fidelity. So that would not be the catchword for the marriage between Diego and Frida. So dog here, no dog here, and, if we look at the, here's our little, faithful dog here, Frida Kahlo versus Diego Rivera. Both of them had multiple lovers. Frida being a bisexual, they often shared, not at the same time, but had similar lovers. So one big mistake that Diego made, which is a good life lesson, is try not to sleep with your partner's brother or sister. That's probably a really, really bad idea. But, people say, well, lots of marriage paintings don't have dogs in them. But Frida actually had a copy of this painting in her studio. So when she painted this one, she's thinking about this one. So there's lots of interesting things to see. And, here's this quote from Frida: "Make love, take a bath, make love again." All right. So that was my first piece.
Oh, well, thanks for that, Charlie. So Fred, let's move from gold to silver.
Okay, once again, I apologize for this noise outside if you hear it. All right, so I'm going to start with a painting by Joan Brown. Joan Brown was a Bay Area painter. She was active in the 1950s and 60s, and she was a part of a movement called the Bay Area Figurative Movement. And it was primarily a reaction to the abstraction, in particular abstract expressionism, that was so big in the 40s going into the 50s. This was a movement to go back to portraying real people in real settings and explore more psychological aspects of people and not just kind of the emotions of those abstract expressionists. And other artists in the Bay Area who were part of that movement you might have heard of were David Park. I think we might have discussed him in one of these Monday sessions. There was a big exhibit of his a couple of years back. Richard Diebenkorn and Elmer Bischoff. So SFMOMA always had a very close relationship with Joan Brown. They mounted her first major solo exhibit in 1971, and she was in fact married in the museum in a big Hindu celebration. In a week, the end of this week, SFMOMA is opening up a major exhibit of her work, including about 80 paintings and sculptures. So although it's not open, there's other works of her in different parts of the museum. So this is up now. And I was really caught by this when I went through the museum the other day. So it was painted in 1973. It's called Vanity, and it is a self-portrait. Now, quite a few artists painted many self-portraits throughout their careers. Two great examples, we had exhibits of both of these people, Andy Warhol, Edvard Munch. And I think it's very interesting when an artist does a self-portrait because really they have complete control over what it is they want you to see about them. And Edvard Munch, for example, really every aspect of his life is portrayed in his self-portraits, including when he was extremely sick, when he was drunk. So they're not all positive images, at least as we would see them as positive. So before talking about the sort of the self-portrait content of this, I want to discuss a little bit and get your views on basically what the style of this painting is. So I guess one way to ask the question is, do you think it's a realistic portrayal of what she's showing, or there are some stylistic elements that strike you as being other than purely representational? What are the first things that you notice about this painting?
Yeah, I'm happy to take a crack at this, although I want to also invite folks in the audience to throw their comments in the chat. It just seems, clearly not representational. I mean, she's made some really curious choices. We see like what is probably a mirror with a silhouette in it. It's not a very realistic silhouette because you would think she'd be in front of the mirror to get that. Also, what's going on with the lamp is really interesting.
Say more about that.
Yeah, that way it changes the color of the table, and it's it's like kind of maybe representing something, and then we get this like really distinct line coming down from the lamp. It's not like if it was realistic, it would be more diffuse, but it's like just kind of like really, it's giving us a triangle, which that's a big Goldberg thing. I know that, right?
Yep.
Do you want to jump in and comment on that, Charlie?
Oh no, I always love triangles. Triangles are this very, very stabilizing visual form. It started, the Masaccio in the Renaissance was really sort of the first one to sort of unite this idea of the triangle, both as a visual thing as well as a religious thing. It represents the Trinity. And so, you'd see the triangle in a lot of Renaissance artists, and it's become something that I really focus on a lot. If you look at like Jacob Lawrence's The Great Migration, how often he uses triangles, in it. It's so I always love when there are uses of triangles. This one's it's pretty interesting. It's a pretty acute triangle that we're seeing here. But I find this piece really fascinating. For one thing, if you look at the self-portrait in the mirror, it has almost like a Picasso-esque feel to it, especially if you look at his early period. And, plus I love the kind of clunky shoes that she has on. They're sort of a time and place. I love the palette of this piece. It's a soft palette. It's not really a vibrant palette. And I think this piece has a really interesting geometric sense to it.
Yeah, I think one of the things that Joan Brown did, as did other artists in this school of painting, are these very sort of flat blocks of color, which in some ways come from a little bit of Picasso and even Cubism. And I want you to think about this also in terms of the perspective. It has sort of it's not exactly a realistic perspective. It's almost like the way someone like Matisse would have painted a table. Instead of seeing it in perspective, you would get a round circle facing you. And you'd know it was a table, but it throws it off because that's not the way we really see a table. We see it at an angle and it's more like an oval. So now I want to switch a little bit to the self-portrait aspect of this painting. So if you accept the premise that an artist wants us to see something particular about him or her in a self-portrait, what do you think Joan Brown is trying to convey about herself in this painting?
I think it's really interesting that she, like the silhouette's in white, and then this figure off to the right is white, almost colorless. Like, I don't know what she's trying, like her art is so important to her, but she's kind of like, we don't even really see her, right?
All right, I want to just jump in there and say, I think you've hit the nail on the head, because I personally think this is about the tension between the artist and her art. And the vibrancy of those colors and those shapes really overpower whatever she's showing about herself, which is like basically in white, not even a full body. I'm not sure if that's a mirror, because I'm not sure that's what would be reflected in the mirror. It's almost like her body is deconstructed in this a little bit, with the head in one place and her lap and her feet in another part of the painting. But I think, Rodney, I think that's a really important part of what she's trying to show about herself here.
Yeah, and we've got some good comments in chat too. Paco talks about how he especially likes the dresser in the drawers. Those drawer handles are really interesting. Anne says, I think the color change from the lamp signals that she is sitting in the dark.
Very good. Yeah.
And Sarah's noting the lamp shadow is oddly asymmetrical.
Mm-hmm.
And Karen notes that she is looking away.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, this is just like really great work to get us excited about this new exhibition that's going to be opening up this weekend.
Yeah, I think that's going to be a must see. It's up on the 7th floor for those of you who make it over there.
And we are going to do a panel discussion of that exhibition.
Oh, great.
Yeah, it's looking like it's going to be second program in January around the 23rd or so.
Okay. All right. And so I'm going to pass it back, I guess, to Rodney. Over to you
Yep.
now, and I'll see you all in a bit.
Okay, well, thank you, Fred. That's great.
Yeah.
Great way to warm us up for this exhibition. I am going to show an artwork and not tell you too much about it. I'm really going to ask Charlie a question about this work. Charlie, what do you think? Do you like this? Does this agree with you? Do you think this is have a positive or a negative view of this artwork?
Well, it's really interesting. My first question is, I wonder why you would point it to me to say whether I like or
I have a reason.
I'm sure you do. I actually really like this piece. I don't know this piece at all. And I really like the palette of it. It has just a softness to it. And it's also evocative, at least in my brain, of a lot of things. I almost imagine like a horse and cart, something like that. Or, it has a lot of movement to it. You have all these diagonal lines in it. It has all these interesting shapes. So I'm really curious to see what the reveal is here and why you think I might have either liked or disliked this painting.
And I will throw it to you, Fred, before I do my reveal. What are your thoughts, Fred? Do you like this? And do you have any idea why I chose this and directed that question at Charlie?
That goes beyond my pay grade to guess why you would do that, but I will comment on the piece. I like what I consider sort of the mix between the natural and the unnatural, because I think it's very easy to read those brown lines as twigs and sticks, and the color as more painterly, not natural, not a depiction of something in the natural world. And that's what I respond to immediately in this. And I agree with Charlie about the movement and the color besides that.
So I'm really glad you both like it. The name of it is Happy End. And it's Charlene von Heil. I hope I'm saying that right. She's a German artist. It's up on the 6th floor where we have a lot of our German art. And the reason I'm directing this at Charlie is that it replaces a painting that Charlie was not very enthusiastic about. Charlie, I think you've said this is one of your least favorite things in the whole art gallery. Georg Baselitz. There's a couple, so I know you didn't care for either one of them. E.S. Heimlich from 1967. So that is now down, and this has taken its place. It turns out that Charlene von Heil is kind of a disciple of Georg Baselitz. So she's younger. She was born in like 1960. Baselitz is, she grew up in West Germany. Baselitz is from East Germany, and I think was born around the time of World War II. So I don't know.
It's often that the students outshine the teachers. You know that, Rodney. But there's something that really interesting in this particular work, which again, I think Baselitz, for one thing, is much more figurative in his work. But there's almost a sense like we're in a room, like we're watching some sort of action. Like if you look in the top right corner, it really looks like like the entranceway or a doorway into a room. So she's almost giving us this sense that there's a lot of action going on in this particular room. I said earlier that it reminded me almost like a horse and cart. I guess we could think that it's the outside of a house, and that's what we're seeing in the corner. I think there's a really nice combination of sort of figurative intimation and abstraction in this work. It's I think it's a fascinating work.
Yeah, and it is interesting. Like Fred, I think you mentioned that there's like both natural and man-made elements of this, and there's some of that in Baselitz also, but the natural is very, very disturbing. So yeah, I just thought another thing I just want to say is one of the things I love about you, Charlie, is that you have strong feelings. Like you don't just tell us the artwork you love in the museum, you also tell us about the artwork you don't love. And that's an interesting way to appreciate the art, that it isn't just like, oh, well, they've chosen this art for us, so it all must be worthy and good,
Yeah.
We can decide what we want to connect with.
I think this painting is psychologically very disturbing. Just this axe in the crotch of a tree. I don't think I need to say anything more than that. I just think it's a really disturbing painting. It's I don't like it aesthetically. I don't like it thematically.
And it's kind of hard to look at, and which there's a lot of stuff from that period in the German art that is pretty disturbing.
Yeah.
So I'm going to stop and turn it back over to you, Charlie, for your
Right.
Second artwork.
So my second piece will be this one. And so these are both in the Diego Rivera exhibition that's going on, the Frida Kahlo piece that I showed you first, and also this Diego Rivera piece from 1940 called Symbolic Landscape. And I think at first glance, if you know Diego Rivera's work, you'd say, what? This is Diego Rivera? Because I think it's really not typical of the type of work that most people know of him. He studied in Paris, and he had a whole Cubist phase, and this particular piece is really much more surrealist than I think what most of us are used to looking at. And this has almost a Dali feel to it. It's as though, look at these little creatures that are, these are maybe creatures, maybe bits of wood or, trees. We're not really sure. But there's some interesting elements to this particular work. And I think especially if you look at the central trunk of this tree and you look at it more carefully, you start to see that there's a human form here. Right, here's the buttocks, here's the back, an arm, there's breasts here. But there's other interesting things here. We see this bloody glove, right? And then we also have a bloody knife with not just a ring on it, but there's a wedding ring. And so I'll sort of cone down on this body, and you can see how you can start to imagine a human form. But if you go back to the whole painting, there's something that you really have to adjust your eyes for. And in the many times that I've shown this painting, I've only had one person who saw this immediately. And that's in the lower left corner here. There's a face. So I'm going to cone down onto that. So do you see the right eye, the left eye, the nose, the mouth? When I cone down on it, you can see that there's a man who's, has his fist gripped like that. Let me go back to the whole painting. So you see a fist here, and you see a fist here, and grabbing at it. This was done in 1940 when Frida and Diego had separated. And so in this painting, here, because he slept with her sister, among other sins, that he's murdered the marriage between them, right? It's not just a ring, it's a wedding ring. And, it's as though, oh, I've made this huge mistake, Frida, I cannot live without you, and he actually gave this painting to her during their divorce period. And then, of course, they did reconcile and remarried, sort of in a restructuring of their marriage. But I think it's a really odd painting. I have to say, I'm not sure aesthetically that I love this painting, but I think it's really unusual and atypical for Diego Rivera. And I just love the little surprise that, of this hidden figure in there. I think it's a really interesting story. Have either of you spent much time at this painting?
I have, but this is a painting. You can spend a lot of time with it and not see the face.
Yeah.
I bet you. And in fact, I'd love to, if anyone out there in chat, you want to chime in on this. If you've seen this and not seen the face, I'd love to hear about that. Or if you did see the face quickly, that's fine too. Yeah, in that whole story about how it fits into their lives is like this autobiographical.
Right. Yeah. and just this, it's such an odd landscape. And, when I look at this, again, being a retired physician, I think of anatomical features. Like, to me, this almost looks like a heart with the great vessels that have been, cut off. Again, I'm making that connection. I don't know if Rivera was making that connection, this idea that, it's a heart without the blood pumping through it. That's where my mind goes. I think there's really interesting elements. There's another world. Actually, some people point out that they think they see another face here. I don't know if you notice that eye, nose, perhaps mouth, almost like a
Oh, yeah.
like image there. So it's a painting that you're rewarded with if you do spend a little bit of time looking at it. And again, very surrealist, not the kind of WPA art or mural art that we think of with Diego Rivera.
Well, I always want to be surprised, and what could be more surprising than something you've seen many times, and there's some element of it you haven't even noticed.
Yeah.
You have thoughts on this, Fred?
Not really. I mean, I did see it at the exhibit. I didn't see nearly as much as I see now, so I'm grateful for that. I'm not a gigantic fan of surrealism. I kind of like the concept of it better than individual works. So, yeah, it's interesting that it's in the mix of what he did, because it is so different from the mural style that he did. That's obvious.
Not a painting I would have on my wall, for example.
But the museum has decided it is a painting to have on their wall.
Yeah.
Because that's not just in the exhibition, it's also really often in the permanent collection on the second floor. Okay, to you, Fred.
Okay, so I need, whoops, how come it's not, here we go. I am going to do my next two together because they're meant to be together. And it's really interesting. This is one of the surprises of doing this presentation this way, is that there are some themes emerging here. And a big one is the exploration of Mexican heritage. Definitely in the Frida Kahlo work and a little bit in the Diego Rivera work. But these next two photographers, this is what their work is really all about. They are both born in America, but have Mexican heritage. This first photographer's name is Cristina Fernandez. She's still very much with us. And she's really focused her work on exploring a Mexican identity and heritage. For example, she did a very big series of laundromats in East Los Angeles, photographed at night from the outside looking in, kind of exploring the rituals and the social interactions that take place in that community in laundromats. I think it's a wonderful series and a really nice concept. So this is what she did here. She took photographs of women taken by famous Mexican photographers, then took a self-portrait of herself in a similar position, and then created a double exposure. So you see both the original image and of her. Now, just a quick sidebar on double exposures. There was an exhibit at the museum several years ago about the so-called mistakes of photography. And one of them was double exposures. So this was more common in the era of film cameras, of course, where the film would not advance properly to the next frame, and you'd end up taking two pictures, and then it'd come out when you print them, then be overlapped. But then many photographers saw that as a wonderful thing to explore on purpose. So obviously, Cristina Fernandez is an example of that. So what do you think she is trying to do by combining these two images, one historic in nature and one contemporary of herself? What is that, do you think she's trying to do with that technique?
I feel like she's maybe tying herself to her heritage and making us think about, today's Mexican Americans, where they came from, and that we have a connection, to our past. Is that I don't know if any others see it differently, but it was kind of really there's how many of these photographs are there, Fred? I think there's at least a dozen.
Well, in this, there are more than what's up now. This is in a survey of a permanent collection called Sightlines. Is that what it's called? Yeah, I think it's called Sightlines. And there's maybe 8 of them, but there are more in the collection, I think.
Yeah, and I found the that Sightlines exhibition on the 3rd floor to be really, really engaging. So highly recommend that. But what do other people think about this choice to kind of put herself into these photographs of people from the past?
Well, in particular, I really like the one on the right. I really like this sense of, it's almost like the ghosts of your heritage, of your past, are embracing you in this way of, don't worry, we're watching over you, we're taking care of you, we are, encasing you in our arms. I think it's really a lovely sentiment. I don't know this work. I don't know this. I've seen this woman's photography before, but I don't know this series at all. And I think it's very touching. It's very lovely.
In fact, many of the images that are at least up in this particular exhibit show the embrace. So that's sort of a common theme.
Yeah.
And I think that's a lovely interpretation of kind of being embraced by your past.
You're being protected.
Yeah.
Nice.
Well, and maybe it also makes us think about the vulnerability of our ancestors, people who came from immigrant backgrounds, and appreciating like the suffering, the struggles that those people went through to kind of make a better life for us. In that I think about my ancestors who came to the United States and the debt I owe them. I don't even know their names, and the incredible debt I owe them for bringing me to this country.
Any other thoughts on this? Otherwise, I'll move on. Okay, so the last person I want to talk about is Luis Carlos Bernal. He died in 1993. He was born in Arizona, and his photography mainly focused on documenting the Mexican-American experience in the Southwest. And I actually don't know if this particular photo is up on the wall, but I want to show it by virtue of comparison to the next one, because most of his photos show people. They are portraits of people in the environments that show something about their lives and their past. But the one I really want to focus on is this one. No people in it. And I want to raise this question. And this came up when we had our session several weeks ago about the exhibit at Pier 24, where there was one photographer in particular who took these extremely moody photos of people's environments where they lived. And I saw them as portraits. And we usually think of portraits as showing people, whether it's, a candid shot or posed, full body, just the head, whether they're in a particular environment or just sort of a plain studio type background. Those are all the choices that you make in portrait photography. But if you think about a portrait as a photograph that shows us something about someone, does that person need to be in the image? And I would ask that question about this photo. What can you intuit or see about the people who live in this space without actually seeing them?
Yeah, well, they clearly live in a place that gets very cold.
Mm-hmm.
So it makes you think about the need to heat a place. And then these two rooms are so different. Like you've got this room that has light in it that's kind of orangish, and then you've got this blue room. I'm noticing that kind of stark looking. So I don't imagine this is the home of anyone with any kind of wealth. What about you, Charlie? What are you getting out of this?
I'm trying to see some of the details of what's on the wall.
It is a little hard. Yeah, even the original is.
I'm wondering, may I assume that that's religious stuff on the wall there?
I think one of them is for sure.
Yeah. So, again, I think this is a wonderful photograph. again, I always like to look at things geometrically, and I love the shapes and forms that are in here. In particular, I love how the heater takes up sort of the major portion of this room, and it sort of reminds me of this famous photograph that Versailles did of Picasso, where Picasso just happens to be in the photograph, but the main focus of the photograph is this gigantic heater that was so important in his apartment, because all the artists used to come there and huddle around because he could afford the heat and they couldn't. So it really reminds me of that photograph, and it makes me wonder whether this person was familiar with that photograph. The other thing I love about it is, again, the palette. I really like the soft blue, the soft orange, and even that kind of soft, almost purple of the I think it's a sofa that we're looking at there. It to me, it's very inviting. It's funny, Rodney, you said that it appears like these are people that probably don't have a lot of money. For me, I have this feeling like, wow, I want to be sitting right there with this family. They've got the cooking utensils hanging up just to the right of the stove, so they're going to make you some great barbecue or something like that. This is a very welcoming photograph. This is not a threatening photograph to me in any way.
I think talking about color again, I mean, these are things sometimes a photographer is super conscious of when they shoot, or they might discover it after and say, wow, I didn't even know that was there. And that's how this orange of this, I think is an arm of a chair here, is picked up by the orange of the interior of this room back here. And again, picked up in the detail of the utensils on the wall here. So it's almost like ties it together. There's like an angle of color from the upper left to the lower right.
Yeah,
and I think those are the kinds of things that I think photographers love to come across.
Yeah. So Anne is saying that it's not a heater, but a stove. My guess is it probably serves a dual purpose.
Yeah, I'm sure it does.
Is my guess.
Yeah.
And Paco just says it's cozy, and I that's the right word for what we're looking at.
Nikki, I have to tell you, this blue reminds me of the blue in your background and your wall there. I'm looking across at your image on my screen.
Nikki's house? No, probably not.
I'm not saying it's your house, but the colors very similar.
No,
Yeah.
for the really bright colors, and I like the inside area, the living room, because it's like a peach or an orange, and it just looks so colorful and warm. That room looks really inviting as well. Both of the rooms look really inviting. In fact, the image I have of my grandmother, who I didn't learn Spanish really as a child, and she never really spoke much English, but I always remember her at the stove with a pot.
Oh, wow.
And not that old of a stove, but not too far away from that, more like from the 50s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. So, Charlie, just going back to your original comment about those sort of images, signs on the wall seeming to be religious in nature, I actually look at that back room as almost a shrine feeling to it. It looks like there's family portraits on this table. Sometimes like Mexican shrines that have all kinds of artifacts related to a family, food, photographs, whatever. And to me, that glow of that back room has that same kind of warm feeling. So whatever starkness is in the foreground, I think is mitigated by the warmth, almost like a hearth feeling of that interior space. I think it's a beautiful photo, and there was a whole gallery by this photographer, and I believe this might have been the only one without people in it, and this was the one I was really drawn to.
Mm-hmm. I can see why. It's very inviting.
Yeah. All right, well, thanks a lot. Back to you, Rodney.
Well, thank you, Fred. My next image is from one of my favorite artists.
Great.
And but also I think it's very timely. We've got, we're in November. It's Thanksgiving is coming up very soon. And this is called Smorgy Bob, the cook. Bob is, of course, Bob Arneson, the sculptor. And I just think this is a really fun kind of self-portrait, which he was kind of known for doing self-portraits. And I don't know if Bob Arneson was much of a cook or not, but he did, in a sense, cook all this stuff because, he had to bake this in a kiln, right? So, I don't think we're all going to eat this food, but it does kind of make us think about that. Charlie, you and I were talking about another work in the SFMOMA collection that this has some connection to in a very different way. We were talking about the Jeff Koons sculpture of Michael Jackson in Bubbles, which is also kind of white ceramic, very, very different feel to it. But what do you guys think of, I don't know if you came across this, but what's your like reaction to this sculpture from Barb Arneson?
Well, I almost included it as one of my 3, Rodney, so there you go. I had not seen it before. I'm assuming it's in the permanent collection, but I was roaming the second floor and came upon it. It was like, wow. Well, I guess, if art as something fun has a role in the serious museum world, then this certainly qualifies. This is just outright fun.
Yep, I totally agree with you. What about you, Charlie?
Well, I don't endorse that connection with the Koons piece, Bubbles. To me, these are 2 completely different works. I don't know this piece either, but I really, really like it. First of all, it's a triangle, right? So, there's that theme again. And Arneson always has his tongue very firmly placed in his and so I really like his sense of humor that comes out in his work. And I would love to see this live. I would really like to examine some of the details a little bit more carefully. The fact that it's all white doesn't lend itself really well to a Zoom presentation. I think this is something that, for example, I'd like to see how the light comes off of each of these different pieces, because you get a sense that there's very, very different textural aspects of everything on the table. You have the plates, which are very flat, which are going to really shine a lot of light, and then the whole sort of antipasta dish that's in front, and I'm not sure what's off to the left, if it's muffins or not. This is the piece that you almost want to touch. You want to run your hands over it and see how it's gotten those different textures. So I'd very much like to see. What floor is this on?
It's on the second floor, and I got a comment that was just to me, but someone saying he might be having a little fun with Wayne Thiebaud, who did all his food art in color, and I think it might be in the same room with Wayne Thiebaud. They both were.
I think it is
Davis. And I'll say another thing about Bob Arneson is he did kind of serve a feast of art. Like that was his great. And he has another one of my very favorite pieces, which is called California Artist. He did it in 1982 after some East Coast artists had been talking about how the California artists were really, not very cerebral or worth really paying attention to. It's hard to see in this image, but it's actually hollow behind the glasses, so that he has a hollow head. He's got some marijuana growing on it, and there's some beer bottles. And I love how it's like, his belly button showing, and he's just kind of looking right at you like, oh yeah, guess what you can do, right? He does also have the very controversial piece of George Moscone that was done in 1981, was commissioned kind of as a memorial to the assassinated former mayor of San Francisco. And this was, something that was displayed at the DeYoung Museum. And because of the controversy, they decided they didn't want to keep it in their collection. It's now in the SFMOMA collection. Huh. You guys have thoughts on, we don't see this very often. Do you think that's as it should be, or do you think the museum really ought to put this on display sometime?
What is the controversy?
Oh, that this is talking about the assassination of Harvey Milk and George Moscone, and it says Twinkie. It says Twinkies here because that was Dan White's defense, the Twinkie defense. It was something that kind of has this kind of a grotesque view of the mayor. It's not the hagiography that they were maybe expecting. It seemed like for some a harsh way of commemorating one of the saddest moments, saddest events in San Francisco history. But it is part of our history. You know,
I would have to know more to really understand the controversy. Based on what you said and what I see, I don't see a problem with this piece.
what about you, Charlie?
You know, are you really going to drain the comic out of the artist? I mean, you know, his sort of tongue in cheek is such an important aspect of his work that, you know, if they really expected a serious tribute to Moscone, I'm afraid they chose the wrong artist. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
I
I
saw
think that's
this
right.
actually, you know, when I was interviewing to work up here in San Francisco, I saw this piece in a restaurant where they took me to dinner. So, and you know, of course, I didn't understand as much about the work when I first saw it, but I was fascinated by it when I saw it.
Where was that on display?
You know, I can't remember what the restaurant was.
Incredible.
And Karen just says, you know, that this shows Moscone's sense of humor as well. So I don't know. I'm not really involved in the controversy of it at all. As a work of art, I think it's amusing and typical of Arneson.
Yeah, I like Karen's comment because, you know, that's a good question. What would George Moscone think of this?
Yeah.
You know, because he was a flesh and blood man who, you know, I don't know, there was more to him than just, he's not just a martyr, you know.
Yeah.
But let's go. We'll go back to the earlier piece that we were looking at. The if I can get back there. Sometimes it's hard to go backwards in PowerPoint, but I want, you know, just a nice way to wish everybody a happy Thanksgiving. And then Charlie, we're going to move on to.
Right. Don't sign. You know, hang on. Just I'll show it.
Okay.
All right. So let me
Stop
share.
sharing.
Yeah, let me share my screen. And I wanted to just, you know, finish up on the theme of Mexican heritage and Mexican artists with the. I'm sorry, what? I'm being told that this artist is not Mexican. Ragnar Kjartanen is actually
Icelandic.
Thank you, not Mexican, so it's not part of the Mexican. But
Where did that come from?
well, Fred, you pointed out that, you know, we seem to have this Mexican.
Yes,
theme.
well, that's forcing it a bit.
I'm sorry. So this is a piece called "The Visitors." Ragnar. It's
Kjartanen, maybe.
Kjartansson. I wrote the
Oh, thank you.
right there just because it is a hard thing to. He's a really interesting artist. He's a performance artist and a musician. He's the son of an actress and a playwright and director. And he named this work after a song by ABBA, the Swedish group. And what he ended up doing was renting a house in the Hudson Valley in New York. And that becomes really, really important because the house becomes one of the characters. And I think, as you can see, it's got these lovely details, but it's also in some disarray. And you see sort of paint peeling and, you know, some of the things have water damage. But it's a video that's over 9 screens. And I just have to tell people that if they've seen this before, it's in a different format than you might have seen it earlier. In the earlier iteration, not only were there screens on the wall, but there were screens that were in the middle of the floor. So one side of the screen would show one room, one side of the screen would show the other. Because in each room of this house, there are musicians. So here you see a woman playing the accordion. Here you see one playing the cello, and this is Kjartansson right here playing the guitar. And you'll see them sort of walking from room to room. So they start to cross from one screen onto another. And they're playing this very repetitive theme, this musical theme, which was actually written by Kjartansson's ex-wife. And by the end, they're all sort of singing this song together, and it's so hypnotic and wonderful. And I remember I have seen parts of this movie many, many times, and I've sat through the entire thing several times. And it's really worth trying to get there right when it's about to begin and really following all the way to the end. If I'm not mistaken, it's about 30 minutes or so. And when we showed it for the very last time at SFMOMA, there were all these fellow guides there, and people had tears in their eyes as it was ending for the final time. And I don't want to reveal the very, very ending. It's a really moving piece, and you can't take your eyes off these musicians. You're just so enthralled at their passion at playing their each individual instrument. And if I'm not mistaken, Rodney, you have a small clip of the videos. I'll stop sharing.
So I'll share my clip of this. And this is, the thing is like, what, 52 minutes long, I think?
Yeah, it's almost an hour. It's almost an hour.
So yeah, it's a piece that really you may not want to leave. It rewards patience. Charlie, you're right. There are a couple of big surprises in this thing that you'll find, I think, wonderful. What are your other thoughts on this, both of you? Fred?
Well, I love this piece. When I first saw it, as Charlie described it, with some of the monitors at angles, you had to walk around, and it had this sort of surprise element to it because you weren't sure what you were going to see next. So when I walked into the current version of it, where all the monitors are visible in one gigantic gallery, my first reaction was disappointment. But you can sit on the floor, which most people do, and see virtually all of the screens just by turning your head a little bit. And so I found that very satisfying too. They're just different. I found myself not liking one more than the other. It's also very cool the way they did the sound, that, for example, the cellist, you hear her more when you're closer to that monitor. So as you walk around the room, there's a different audio experience than just thinking you'd hear everything equally all around the room. So I think it's beautifully done. I think the space that they found was just amazing. I mean, Charlie's right. It's like this falling down place that has charm and history and decadence and who knows what else went on in that house. But it was an incredible location to do this in. I have to say one thing. As a musician, I find the piece of music kind of boring. It just never ends. Yeah. And I actually have not seen the ending, but I also chose not to stay long enough to hear the ending because the music doesn't really do anything to me. I love the concept of the piece, absent the actual music itself.
It kind of brings to mind the Rolling Stones album Exile on Main Street, which was recorded in a house in the south of France where everybody was in a different room, and they just wired up this whole house. And I guess they all had headphones on like that. And
oh, wow. That's great.
That's one of the, in my opinion, one of the greatest albums of rock history. What else do you want us to know from your perspective, Charlie?
Oh, I think it's very hypnotic. I think you have to be in the right frame of mind. I think you need to surrender to this piece. I see where Fred might find the music a little bit. It is by definition repetitive. And so if you're concentrating on that, you might be bored. But I think that you'll be rewarded if you really watch the musicians play. You look at their eyes, you look at their intensity. Several of the musicians switch instruments mid-song. So the bass player starts to pick up a banjo, the accordionist picks up I think she picks up a
Guitar.
something like that. There are all these different things that happens, and how, every now and then you see someone walk from one room into another. So they end up in a different spot on a different screen. And then, there's other things that are going on that I don't want to reveal. If people do, I found this an immersive experience. And I loved every minute that I was in there, and I wanted to go back and see more and pay more attention to one room, or, pay attention to one musician, or see how they kind of worked out the details of, it's one of those things that you can both experience as sort of a sensual moment, but also you can ask those sort of intellectual questions about, how did they do that, and why are they doing it this way? And
I mean, the production values are super. The cameras are still. There's probably no camera people involved. Once the camera is set up, it stays still. The sound quality is amazing. They're all wearing headphones, as you can see in this image, so they're hearing what's going on in all the other rooms. So technically, it's really, really impressive.
Yeah. And Paco, you're right. He is playing a guitar here. That's a guitar. This is the artist himself.
It's the guitar that gets wet.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, so there are some wonderful surprises in this, which we will not spoil for you. The one thing I don't want you to be surprised by is you need to get, I think it's a timed entry. So you need to get a special ticket now. It used to be, when they did it before, it was on the 7th floor and you could just enter whenever you wanted. Now, I think it's on the 5th floor.
Sixth.
Is it on the 6th floor?
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess you're right. And you need to, just when you get your ticket, tell them you want to see the visitors, and I guess they'll tell you your entry time. They're trying to make sure that there aren't too many people in there. And then when I went, they actually have these little folding chairs that you can take in. If you do want to sit, you can do that.
Right.
So that's kind of our show about all the cool things going on at SFMOMA. I think this is a really good time to go to the museum. We've now got the new director in place for over 6 months, and we're hoping to have some exciting changes at the museum that who knows, maybe even involve some of us. We're all kind of waiting with bated breath, but maybe there's a really bright new future for SFMOMA. It's also going to be free. I think the first weekend in December, a philanthropist has donated money so that it's going to be free both there, and actually lots of other area museums are going to be free. I think the Asian Art Museum, the De Young, the Cartoon Art Museum, the Disney Family Museum. I can't name them all, but that's a great opportunity. Also heard that there's another donor who's going to make the 2nd floor free to the public for much of 2023. I just read that. Which is great because that's the permanent collection. That's where you would see, the Bob Arneson, the Diego Rivera piece that Charlie talked about normally would be found there, the Frida Kahlo. So lots of good stuff happening at SFMOMA. Hope you guys are inspired to go. Fred, Charlie, it's always a ton of fun to do these programs with you. Thank you so much for coming on Art Viewing Adventures.
My pleasure.
Hope to have you guys back when maybe we get another crack at Pier 24, which unexpectedly closed for the rest of the year. Otherwise, we would have been talking more about that.